Hi, Moses.
Hi, Avi. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. Good. I'm good.
You are in Ilorin in Nigeria.
Yes, I am in the city of Ilorin.
Okay. How is it there at the moment? What's happening?
Uh, it's fine. The weather is fairly cool for our context here, and everything is moving pretty well, other than the challenge of COVID-19 that is shaking the whole world at the moment.
Yeah, it's shaking. It's shaking the entire world. We in the UK have
Yes.
really been affected.
Yeah.
Can I give you a chance to introduce yourself to our audiences?
Okay. Thank you. Uh, I am Babatomiwa Moses Owojaiye. If you don't mind, I can tell you the meaning of those names. Babatomiwa means one who is born shortly after his father or grandfather dies. So it's the African belief in reincarnation. So it is believed that I came to replace my grandfather. I was born just a week after he passed on. That's my first name. Moses is my other name, and my family is Owojaiye, which means if you have money, you will control life. Uh, at the moment, I pastor the First Evangelical Church Winning All in the city of Ilorin. It is called First ECWA, Ilorin. First ECWA is 76 years old now, and I also teach at ECWA Theological Seminary, Igbaja. ECWA Theological Seminary is just about 50 minutes away, 50 minutes drive from here. And I also provide leadership to the Center for Biblical Christianity in Africa. This is an initiative founded in the year 2017 to contribute to the deepening of the roots of biblical Christianity in Africa and to the widening of the transformative impact of the Christian message in the public square. I can add that I studied World Christianity at Africa International University with partnership with the University of Edinburgh under the leadership of Professor Mark R. Shaw and Professor Andrew F. Walls, to mention just a few of them. And I finished my PhD studies in the year 2017. Thank you.
Brilliant. And we share a mutual friend, Wanjiru.
Okay, yes. Wanjiru and I are friends. We are also colleagues. I started, I am the first MTH graduate in World Christianity at Africa International University. And when we commenced our PhD immediately, I met Wanjiru. We studied together under Professor Mark Shaw for about 3 years before we started our field research, and that was when we departed. Wanjiru graduated 2 years ahead of me. She finished in the year 2015. I came back to Nigeria to conduct my field research, and that took me some time. And I was able to finish in the year 2017. And since then, Wanjiru and I have been good friends. She has contributed immensely to my academic growth, and I thought that she's someone I cannot let go for the rest of this journey. So we keep abreast of our developments as we travel on this path.
That's really good. It's important to have journey, to have friends to journey with on in this academic life. So you studied at Africa International University in Nairobi. What was your PhD work on?
My PhD work was on the images of Pentecostal religious functionaries in the Nigerian Christian films, with the case of Evon World Network. Evon World Network is about the second largest indigenous Christian film industry in Nigeria, only after Mount Zion, Nigeria. And my concern was to look at how religious functionaries are portrayed in their movies and how that would impact on the image of the church in the public sphere. It was an intersection of theology, culture, and media studies, but my concern was really on the subject of perception.
How did you end up deciding on that question?
That's very interesting. At that time, the literature on majority of the literature on African Pentecostalism and its appropriation of media had two dominant themes. First was the theme of modernity, and the other one was on the theme of nation building, the role of Pentecostal Christianity in nation building and modernity. So I thought that, can we look at African Pentecostalism, particularly when it relates to its appropriation of media with other lenses? And that was why I was particularly concerned about how religious functionaries are portrayed. Essentially because most of these studies conducted on African Pentecostalism have kind of have given very little concern on the strategic place that religious functionaries occupy in the Pentecostal Christianity generally, and in fact in religious spheres generally in Africa. So I thought that studying them to see how they influence the adherents is strategic for moving our knowledge on African Pentecostalism forward. And so that was my interest in the subject.
I mean, it sounds to me like a unique interest. That's why I'm wondering how did you zero in on perception?
Thank you.
How did you come to zero in on perception?
Because there are arguments on film studies as to whether people really make use of what they see in films directly, as to whether film content or media content generally has any impact on media audience. And so I thought, my bias was that I thought that film content do have impacts on their consumers. But because I wanted a balance and I wanted to do something objective, so instead of looking at the subject of the reality, I wanted to look at the subject of perception. So to be on the safe side.
Do you have a background in media studies or something like that?
Before that time, no, but I was privileged to benefit from the partnership between the Center for Study of World Christianity in Africa International University with the Center for the Study of World Christianity in the University of Edinburgh. So I was funded to travel to Edinburgh to study for a couple of months under a distinguished professor of communication and media studies by the name Professor Julian Mitchell. So I was under him for some 5 to 6 months, and I was also under the tutelage of Professor Afeya Dogame, who kind of has some scholarly background in the intersection between Pentecostalism and media appropriation as well. So I drew a lot from their wisdom, and my interaction with them brought some light into my ability to be able to shed light on that question.
Sure. That makes perfect sense.
Thank you.
That's an interesting journey, though.
Yeah.
Right, Nigeria.
Yeah.
You go through Kenya and Edinburgh to get to this question.
Thank you.
Did you have a research question?
Yes, I did.
Okay, tell me about your research question then.
There was one central research question and about 4 other sub-questions. The central question was, to what extent do Evon films and their Christian audience members' perception compare and contrast with the assessment of Pentecostal religious functionaries prevalent in scholarly writings on Pentecostalism and films in Africa? And that was the central question. And then that central question was approached from 4 perspectives. First, I asked the question, what research methods best meet the objectives and the appropriateness, or appropriately answer the research question under investigation in the study? And the second one was, how are Pentecostal religious functionaries portrayed in scholarly writings on Pentecostalism and films in Africa? The third one was, what are the audience members' perceptions of the representations of Pentecostal religious functionaries in Evon films specifically? And the fourth one was, how are Pentecostal religious functionaries represented in films produced by Evon World Network? And those were the questions that guided the study.
And what was the methodology?
I used a number of methodologies. First, it was a case study research. So, and then, but I dwelled very significantly on qualitative research method. This is the research method that allows researcher to study a phenomenon from a multidimensional perspective. And when you look at this particular study, it's a combination of cultural studies with theology and with media studies. And qualitative research method allows me the opportunity to be able to dealt with the subject on a multidimensional perspective and reach a conclusion using that framework. Beyond that, in terms of sampling, I made use of purposive sampling method. While studying Evon World Network, the Christian producing film industry in Nigeria, because of my experience with the film industry, I was able to determine to whether to select it above other film industries in Nigeria, and I was permitted by purposive sampling method, which provides opportunity for a researcher to determine what context or subject to study and for the purpose of data collection in the given study. Purposive sampling method helps researcher to intentionally select individuals and sites to learn or understand a given phenomenon. And that was exactly why I decided to choose that. And beyond that, I studied 10 films produced by Evon World Network using content analytical method, some in the Yoruba language and some in the English language, to determine the frequency of prevalent themes in those films. But in addition to that, I also interviewed 30 audience members of EVOM themes, cutting across what we call 5 Christian blocks under the umbrella of the Christian Association of Nigeria. Then under this umbrella, we have 5 Christian blocks. One is what they call the AOIC. The other one is what they call ECWA Tekan. The other one is what they call CSN, and 2 others. So I identify audience members from these various groups to ascertain that they cut across the representation of Christian bodies in Nigeria. And my site for selecting was at the year 2014 annual Easter film show of EVOM. Every year during Easter period, EVOM World Network will do a stage display of their drama. And in this meeting, they usually have about 2 to 2,500 people attend the meeting. So all I needed to do was to go to the meeting, get the permission of the organizers of the event, and I made an announcement for people who may be interested in providing data on the subject that I was studying. And I was able to get about 40 people show interest. But at the end, I was able to follow up with about 30 of them. 30 of them were patient enough to follow with me. And I conducted interviews with these people within a span of about 6 months, meeting them one-on-one. And after that, I first transcribed the interviews and then compiled the data, transcribed the interviews, disassembled the interviews, and then reassembled them and then interpret them before drawing conclusions and inference on the frequent themes in the subjects of the films as well as in the interviews.
Okay. What did you find?
Very, very interesting question. Like I mentioned before this time, the dominant themes in literature on the subject of African Pentecostalism and its appropriation of media were themes of modernity, consumerism, themes of nation building. And I was interested in finding how the representation of religious functionaries, particularly Pentecostal religious functionaries, will play out in the themes that was prevalent. It was interesting to see that my findings was nuanced, was also complex and complicated. For instance, I found out that religious functionaries in the urban setting, in the films, are represented differently for those who are in the setting, in rural settings. And those in the urban settings are usually represented as people who live posh lives, people who live in opulence, and are almost always rich in terms of material wealth. That's one, and that is to the positive. But also, I found that majority of the audience see these people as agents of God's communication and communicators of the gospel, the interpreters of the word of God. And they also see them as people who have deep knowledge of the word of God and have access to certain formulas that are not easily accessible to the ordinary Christians on the street. Those are on the positive, but there are some challenging ones. Like, for instance, audience members hold to the view that religious functionaries as portrayed in the film they cannot be seen the way they are portrayed in film in real life, because most of them are portrayed as gentle, melancholic people who are easygoing, and they usually are well behaved. But in real life, that is not the truth. Some of them are not that well behaved and as cultured as they are presented in the films. And again, they also portray them as people who serve as intermediaries or spokespersons between humans and God, and between God and humans.
You're talking about Pentecostal functionaries.
Mm.
Who is in this group of functionaries? What kind of people are you talking about?
Thank you very much. We mean by the word religious functionaries, is not my original word. I got it from the writings of Professor Kwabena Asama-Ogwandu, that Ghanaian theologian.
Sure.
And in my study, it represents anyone who is portrayed in the film, male or female, as a pastor, an evangelist, prophet, apostle, or a teacher of the word of God. So anyone who belongs into this 5 bishopric leadership categorization are the people I considered in this study as religious functionaries. On the general term, we call them pastors, of course,
Sure.
Generally, but they function differently based on their offices.
Brilliant. Can you summarize your research finding?
Yes, the finding, like I said, showed that the portrayal of religious functionary is another lens to look at the representation of Pentecostal religious functionary in literature as it relates to its appropriation of media, that these religious functionaries occupy a central role in the way Pentecostalism is viewed in Africa, and they come out with mixed representations. Some of them are exploitative, some of them are mixed escapist, some of them are also prophetic in outlook. But in contrary to the perspective dominant in literature, the study of Avon films and their audience members revealed that additional lenses for viewing these religious functionaries are to look at the way they are portrayed in films.
Okay, brilliant. Did you expect that, or was it a surprise for you?
Yes, well, there were a number of surprises.
Okay.
For instance, I was surprised to discover that the audience members that I studied that belong to the Pentecostal circle were the one who raised issues mainly on the negative portrayal of Pentecostal religious functionaries in films. They were the one who raised issues regarding the fact that the way they are portrayed in film is different from the way they behave in real life. That in films, they kind of present them as modest, kind, and prophetic people, but in real life, they opine that most of their religious members are exploitative and escapist. I was surprised to see that Pentecostals themselves are the ones viewing their leaders as the way they are represented in films that way. And I was also surprised to discover that people who do not belong to the Pentecostal circles, for instance, historic churches like the Roman Catholic Church, the Anglican Communion, were the ones who kind of see religious functionaries in film in a positive way, as though the way they are represented in film is the way they also behave in real life. So ordinarily, one would think that people who do not belong to the Pentecostal circle will be critical of the representations of Pentecostal leaders in films, but they were not critical. I discovered that it was the Pentecostals themselves who were critical of their leaders, to say that the way they are represented in film is completely different from the way they behave and the way they view them in real life. This for me came as a major surprise.
And what's the reason? Why do people view their pastors like this? And why keep following them if they don't trust them?
So that's okay. That's one area that may need further illumination. So I didn't. I think there's a gap between the way they are represented in film and the way these people live their lives and in real life. One dominant theme in literature, and that we see in the film itself, is prosperity living, prosperity theology. Most of these film consumers are poor people, and some of them are surprised to see that their pastors are not helping them. And then they see these pastors living, on the other hand, in posh lives. But one keeps wondering why they keep following these people, knowing that the life they live is kind of is in opposition to what the Bible truly teaches. So how to separate that is a concern. We will need to illuminate that further, and maybe in further studies.
You said you had several surprises. What's the second one?
Okay. The second one is the fact that most Pentecostal members, most of the ones that interviewed, preferred films. They kind of respect pastors who are not within the Pentecostal circles. For instance, they have a lot of regard for the Roman Catholic priests, that they see them as upright people and people who submit to authority and people who obey constituted authority in our interviews of them. But when it comes to their leaders, they kind of see that these people are self-styled. They are not willing to listen to follow. They have built their institutions around themselves, and they are not willing to follow any given institution other than the ones that they have established. So for me, these critical observations of Pentecostal leaders by their followers, for me, it's a major surprise. I would think that they would be the ones that would support the way their leaders are represented, but to the contrary, in my study, that was not forthcoming.
Sure. Anything you want to add to that?
For me personally, this kind of gave birth to an interest that I've been trying to pursue ever since, which is the intersection between what Christianity, public life, and the practice of pastoral ministry in Africa. The practice of pastoral ministry is one area that I think the study of world Christianity must pay attention to going forward. And that has been my area of little interest and contributions ever since I concluded these studies. I've basically been writing on how self-styled prophets have contributed to the battering of the image of Christianity in Africa.
I look forward to reading that.
Thank you.
What was life as a PhD student like?
Yes, I would say challenging and interesting. Of course, I think that's the completeness of life. Life itself must be challenging and it must be interesting. Interesting on the first level because I was fortunate with my colleagues to be taught by thinkers in this field who have made significant contribution, and some of what some of the people will call first generation scholars in the field. I was fortunate to be taught by Andrew Walls, Mark Shaw, Brian Stanley, Afe Adogan, Denniston, Jimson Kansal, Prepong, Lame Sane, and the list can continue. So these people inspired us, inspired me a great deal. And the opportunity to be able to do some studies at the University of Edinburgh and maybe one or two other universities, libraries in the UK was indeed an additional interesting opportunity for me. So the journey was that interesting. But in terms of writing, it was challenging, and the challenges were worth it. For me, the first challenge was that my background has been in theology. My first encounter with cultural studies per se would be when I was undertaking my MTH, and that exposed me. I developed an interest in that. And then also when we started the PhD, I was furthermore exposed to cultural studies and film particularly. And if you allow me, my interest in film studies is not just academic, it is also spiritual, because if I may say, I became born again, I became a Christian by getting exposed to a Christian movie, and that has given me, and that was how my Christian birth came to be. And since that time, I've been interested in films, and then I saw that it was possible for me to explore that even through academics.
What movie was that led to your conversion?
It's one produced by Ivom. It was made in Yoruba, and the title is Olugbala Gbami, which means "Save me, O Lord," or "Deliver me, O Lord." And it was a story of two young men who were living in frivolity and rascality until they had an encounter with one old man who used to live that kind of life, and who was sharing his personal life story with this young man. And after he concluded the story, they also thought that they want a turnaround in their lives, and he introduced them to Jesus. And following that story, it looked to me as if it was also my own personal life story, and that caught my spirit. And then I considered.
How long ago was that?
And that was a little less than 30 years back.
Okay.
I think it should be some 28 or 29 years ago.
Awesome.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Yes.
Okay, you were still reflecting on your PhD journey. What challenges?
Yes, and so one of the challenges was the difficulty in being able, before I could find a way, what methods to use, what theoretical framework to guide my study, and with which to guide my analysis. And that gave me some time, but some challenges, but it helped me to be able to read wide in media studies, in cultural studies, as well as in theology generally, but basically African Christian theology. And in the end, it came out fine for me, and today I'm better for it. I also had a challenge of resources, but God sent help to me. Unlike most of my colleagues, I initially didn't have any scholarship or funding to support my studies. But my professors were very helpful when they saw the promise that the study had and the future that it can give. So they were very supportive. They rallied around and they helped raise funds. And I'm eternally grateful to them for the support that they provided. One of the support was the opportunity to be able to benefit from the partnership between the Center for the Study of World Christianity at the University of Edinburgh and the same center at the University Africa International University.
Sure. All right. From your research,
yes,
what would you get from it to share with the African church? What's the implication of your Ph.D.? What's your contribution to the day-to-day life of the African church?
Okay. First, it has, like I mentioned, it has helped us to gain more knowledge on African Pentecostalism generally, to increase the lenses with which we view that brand of Christianity, specifically as it relates to its appropriation of media. So I would think that this study has further pushed our knowledge forward in that regard. But in addition to that, it has also highlighted the centrality of religious functionaries and how that is connected to what Christianity, particularly how it is important for us to pay attention in our study of what Christianity generally to the place of pastoral leadership generally within the African church. That synchronizes very well with the wisdom of Richard Ramesh that says pastoral health affects church health and church health affects societal health. So when pastors are correct, it's highly likely that the local church will be correct and the followers of Jesus Christ will lead their lives in a way that they will contribute significantly to the progress of the society and increase the testimony of the Christian message in the public square. One other area is also the bridge between culture, theology, and media studies. This study was approached from a multidimensional perspective. So in terms of its research method, it was generally acknowledged by my examiners and anyone who has encountered the study as very rich in methodology. So this study provides additional way to study theology from a multi-dimensional perspective. And these are the three that I would like to isolate for now.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank
you. In your capacity, in your current role, if you were to have a chance to speak to younger generation African Christians about theological education, and you can look at it from any of the themes that are of interest to you, but just the place of theological education in both their own formation, but also in the shaping of the society as a whole.
First, I would say that anyone who desires to take leadership or provide leadership to the church must pay attention to the centrality of training and theological education. This one, in this case, is germane. It is non-negotiable. It is central to our development. But in addition to that, I would like to advise the younger generation behind us that it does take time. This is not something that is going to happen quickly. It's a process that will take. It's a lifelong process. So it's not something they will want to rush in, rush out. They must give it time. They must be disciplined. They must pay attention to their lives as well as being willing to sacrifice to obtain what is best. But in addition to that, I want to also say that as we look at the importance of academics, we should also put some emphasis on spiritual formation, the integrity of Christian character as leaders. And I would add that we should also pay attention to theologies that speak to our context. Most times, what we do, there are sometimes some gap between what we study and the reality that we encounter in the context. So anyone who is interested in following this trajectory must look to bridging this gap between what we study and what we encounter in the real context of the practicing of our theology and Christianity.
Thank you. That's really good. Final question, and maybe you've answered it already, but I have to ask it anyway. Normally, I ask people to mention some of their key African theological influences.
Okay.
And you've mentioned a few names, but let's highlight a few.
Okay. Yes, I would say African theologians whose works have influenced my thinking. First on the list would be Professor Ogbu Kalu, and followed by Lame Sane and Kwame Bediako, and John S. Mbiti, and Biancato. Those will be my first most. Of course, I could mention a few more. I have GNK Mudodi beyond that list. Those will be my premier list in terms of influence on my theological thinking.
All right. Is there anything else that you would like to share? Maybe about your work, about your ministry, about your book that's coming soon?
Oh, okay. Hopefully in the very soon we expect a study on how the coronavirus lockdown has affected in-person corporate worship in Nigeria, and using the Evangelical Church Winning All as a case in point. Well, I consider this an introductory study to the big subject of coronavirus, but my interest in the forthcoming book is to zero in on how the lockdown has affected Evangelical Church Winning All, and some of them to the wider church. And I've looked at the subject of evangelicalism and the relationship between evangelicalism and Pentecostalism. That is still a big issue in our context here in Nigeria in terms of the relationship, whether they are related or they are two different entities in terms of what I mean, evangelical movement and Pentecostal movement. I try to provide my reflection on what I think, how I think they are related, how I think the two movements are related.
Do you identify as an evangelical or as a Pentecostal or both?
I am an evangelical.
Okay.
Yes. So I also looked at corporate worship in ECWA and what I call essential elements of corporate worship in ECWA, and how COVID-19 has come to change that during the lockdown, and some lessons that the church in Africa can learn from the lockdown for the future of the church going forward.
And who is publishing this book?
This book will be published by Westbow Press in Bloomington in the US, Indiana,
Okay,
US.
Indiana, that's right.
Yes.
All right. Good. Let us know when the book is out.
Oh, okay. We'll let you know.
I'd
Thank
like
you
to
very much.
sit down again and talk about it.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Anything else you'd like to add?
No, I'm okay. Other than to thank you for this opportunity. We look forward to more conversations with you
Sure.
on the growth of the church in Africa. Thank you
Yeah.
very much.